That's why they're fighting the Palestinians. They're not fighting the Palestinians because the Palestinians are attacking them. The Palestinians aren't attacking them. They're fighting the Palestinians because they don't want to have Palestine integrated with them because they'll instantly lose their majority. There are actually 7 million Palestinians living in Palestine and Israel. But 5 million are confined to the concentration camp that we call the Gaza Strip. It's just a concentration camp. And then the ghetto that we call the West Bank. It's basically a bunch of little ghetto pockets. And so by doing that, what the Israelis have done is they've created a situation where the natives are in internal exile. Right? They're still in Palestine. They're just not in their homes. Their homes are in Haifa or Jaffa or Jerusalem. And so they're displaced inside their own country as a majority, but with no rights to citizenship. This is like the most nasty thing since apartheid Israel and apartheid South Africa. It might be worse than apartheid South Africa.
I'm an Israeli. I was born in Israel. I even perceive myself as an Israeli patriot. I care about Israel. I belong to Israel. I'm attached to Israel. Don't speak about symmetry because there is no symmetry. I would even suggest that there is no conflict. Was there a French-Algerian conflict? There was a brutal French occupation in Algeria, which came to its end. And there is no Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is a brutal Israeli occupation which must come to its end one way or the other. In our backyard, there is a regime which is today by far one of the most cruel, brutal tyrannies on earth. And I know what I say because I cover it for 40 years. And this regime cannot be defined but as an apartheid. Two peoples live on one piece of land. One people has all the rights in the world, and I'm talking now only about the occupied territories. One people has all the rights in the world. The other people has no rights whatsoever. It looks like apartheid. It talks like apartheid. It is apartheid. And nobody can contradict it. Go to the Jordan Valley. See the prosperity in the settlements, and then go and see the Palestinians who live there without electricity, without water, without any rights. And then tell me if it's apartheid, or you might invent it another time.
But this is the first time I've ever heard that there's a need to condemn. And say, yes, but of course they're suffering, but first we need to condemn. Are we out of our minds? Condemning the resistance of the people who are being oppressed and killed, subjected to genocide for 75 years? Are we out of our minds? Are we out of our minds? Are we outside of our minds when we let this ridiculous narrative take hold and spread and then participate in it, nodding our heads like sheep? Oh, and by the way, yes, there is a genocide going on and it's terrible. But first we have to condemn the Palestinians who dare to stand up. Palestinians who have shown an ability to sacrifice and amounts of courage that, as far as I can remember, are unprecedented, facing this horrific, horrific oppression. But what are we really talking about? Again, we've heard lists and lists and lists of crimes committed by the State of Israel. Lists and lists of crimes against humanity. And there's always seems to me like there's a little bit of a sense of surprise, a little bit of shock, a little bit as though this was somehow not predictable. What we are seeing now in Gaza was not only predictable, it was preventable. And we did not prevent it. The previous massacre in Gaza was predictable too, and that was not prevented. And we can go on and on and on and on back 75 years. Because what could possibly be expected from an apartheid regime established after a massive campaign, open massive campaign of ethnic cleansing, massacres, and the beginning of a genocide that is still going on today? What could possibly be expected? That was the founding moment of the State of Israel. Close to 1 million people forced out of their land. God knows how many were massacred. And that was the beginning. That was 1948. So now we're shocked. All these lists and lists and lists and lists, there's nothing new about them. Except this time the numbers are higher. This time the numbers are, even by Israeli standards, it is shocking. But this was predictable and this was preventable. And every time something happens, we rise, we protest, we demand, and we forget. Instead of standing there and demanding an end, an absolute end to the oppression and the killing of Palestinians, an end to it. Not a ceasefire to it, an end to it. A political solution that will guarantee the lives, the security, the safety of Palestinians. That has never been discussed. I don't recall it ever being discussed. That guarantees need to be put in place. Guarantees need to be put in place for the life and security and the safety of Palestinians, because Palestinians have been living in a state of terror for 75 years. Not just now, but for 75 years living in a state of terror, whether they're in the West Bank, whether they're in the Gaza Strip, whether they're citizens of the State of Israel or so-called citizens. They have been living in a state of terror, and they still do today. Granted, the level of terror has increased since October the 7th.
Here in Israel, for generations, we kill the Palestinians. We injure the Palestinians. We have more than 1,500 Palestinians in administrative detention. We demolish their houses here in Jerusalem. We cut down their olive trees. We confiscate their property, their waters. And most Israelis expect them to accept it. And when they don't accept it, they react in violent way. They blame them, the Palestinians. For most Israelis, we hold millions of Palestinians under occupation for generations. They are deprived their basic rights. And for most Israelis, it can go on forever. Look, don't get me wrong, I'm not justifying the violence. But this is I think the realistic conclusion. How can we expect the Palestinians to live under occupation forever? Every Israeli citizen knows clearly that if you dare to show the slightest sentiment towards the people of Gaza, if you criticize killing of innocent civilians, including women and children in Gaza, you will be politically persecuted. You will go through public shaming. You will lose your job. And in my case, be put in jail. I wanted as many Israelis to know what is done on their behalf. Most Israelis don't know, because the mainstream media doesn't show what really goes on in Gaza, what we are doing in Gaza. They wished me to die, they wished my children to die, they threatened to rape my daughter. That was the kind of reactions that were against. I was called for a hearing on October 18th, and the next day I was fired. The police asked me to come over for an interrogation. The minute I walked into the police station, they cuffed my hands and legs and confiscated my phone. Then, 5 detectives escorted me to my apartment and ransacked the place upside down. They put me in solitary confinement in a cell with no windows. They took away my watch. I didn't know when it was daytime, when it was nighttime. For them, I'm Hamas supporter. They refused to enter the class, and they began a very, very violent demonstration. I was literally under siege inside the teacher's room. Dozens of students were on the windows, knocking the windows, cursing me.
The place is of this Zionist government, and the place of this head of the Zionist Air Force, which conducted this war crime by bombarding so many millions of innocent people. They're supposed to be shipped into Hague in Netherlands. There is a court, international court for justice for war criminals. That's their place. They should be judged and jailed and receive their punishments, which they deserve. It's very important to put them in jail, these war criminals, in order to show that there is justice. Palestinian groups, leaders, military groups saying, we have nothing against Jews. We tolerate Jews. We lived with Jews thousands of years together. The 300,000 people left Spain. Where did they leave to? China? Japan? Australia? No. They left to Turkey. They left to Algeria, Tunisia, Morocco, Albania in the Second World War. It was a small Muslim country, and they had a few thousand Jews there. Nazi Germany has occupied Albania, but not a single Jew was killed in Albania. You know where the Muslims were hiding the Jews? They were hiding them in mosques, in basements, in all types of places. And they saved all these 5,000 Jews in Albania. We're going to live together as the same as it was everywhere, as the same as Jews lived in Turkey, Algeria, Morocco, in Iran, till now, peacefully, in harmony, without any problems.
כן. את ואני עשינו, ואז אני ניצחתי אותה. ובגלל שהגם כל מנוסה כושר, אמרו, רגע, אם חי ניצחה אותה, אז בוא נעשה איתה. ואז אחד מהם, הצעיר, עשה איתי הורדת ידיים, אבל הוא הביא מגבת, כדי לא... כי אסור לו לגעת בי.
אישה היא מאוד... אישה היא קדושה שם.
אישה היא מלכה. היו עושים לי שיחות איך לשמור על אגם. הסברנו להם שגם אצלנו לפעמים כן יש... שלאדם יכול להיות חבר, או יכולים להיות לה כמה חברים לפני שהיא תתחתן. אני אפילו מעודדת את זה, שהיא תתנסה, שהיא תכיר, לפני שהיא אצלה מוסד הנישואים. אבל היינו מתאמתים על זה.
כן, גם אמרו לי, אנחנו מחתנים אותך בעזה. את בעזה, את מתחתנת. אנחנו נמצא לך גבר בעזה.
הם נתנו לה שם מאוד יפה. שם ערבי מאוד יפה.
סלסביל. זה מים, זה כתוב להם בקוראן, מים מתוקים כזה. עכשיו אמרתי לו שזה קטע, כי...
Swedish diplomat Count Folke Bernadotte was appointed as UN mediator in Palestine. His mission was to seek a peaceful settlement. Count Bernadotte surveyed the devastated Palestinian villages and visited refugee camps in both Palestine and Jordan. In a report, he wrote, "It would be an offense against the principles of elementary justice if these innocent victims were denied the right to return to their homes." On September the 17th, 1948, the day following his UN report, the motorcade of Count Bernadotte was ambushed in Jerusalem. He was shot at point-blank range by members of the Jewish Stern Gang.
ויעשו השם, אוי ויעשו השם, ויעשו השם עד נובוסוי.
So you want to talk about your October 7th? Okay, let's talk about ours. 1948, Deir Yassin Massacre. 1948, Kantura Massacre. 1953, Kibya Massacre. 1956, Kafr Qasim Massacre. 1956, Rafah Massacre. 1970, Bahr al-Bakr Massacre. 1982, Sabra and Shatila Massacre. 1994, Khalil Massacre. 2002, Jenin Massacre. Gaza Massacre 2002, Gaza 2012, Gaza 2014, Gaza 2021, Gaza 2023. So when you can sit with Palestinians and talk about our massacres, then we can talk about your October 7th. And as always, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
You, Israel, you motherfucker!
Hi.
Fuck you!
It's nice to meet you.
Shut you, bitch!
It's nice
Shut you, bitch!
I'm from Palestine.
Free Israel, you motherfucker!
Free Israel from what?
You bitch! I f*** you up!
What do they teach you? What do they teach you in school?
Free Israel, you motherfucker!
From what? From what?
You suck my
What the
WHO has documented 721 attacks on healthcare in the occupied Palestinian territory since October 7. Out of those 721, 357 attacks in the Gaza, resulting in 645 fatalities and 818 injuries. Health facilities are protected under international humanitarian law, and we keep really repeating our appeal to all parties to the conflict to respect that health workers, ambulances, hospitals, patients should never be a target and should be protected.
And I will say, absolutely 100%, without reservation, I support the right of self-defense. Without any doubt, I would be involved myself in violent resistance if I were a citizen of Palestine or Iraq or Afghanistan. And if I were a citizen of the United States or Britain and someone from halfway around the world came into my country and started stealing my land and killing my family, guess what? I would defend my country as well. So I absolutely 100% defend the right of self-defense, and I will never shy away from that. I will not join the long list of embarrassments who condemn terrorism while forgetting to acknowledge that the biggest terrorist on the planet is the United States government.
Hamas doesn't recognize the right of Israel to exist.
You know what that sounds like to me? That sounds like the African National Congress and Nelson Mandela refusing to accept apartheid and recognize apartheid. I say that Israel, if it wants to be a genuine partner in any kind of peace, needs to destroy its whole ideology of Zionism. Zionism that makes other people goyim, who do not deserve to be in the Holy Land. That's the real problem. If Israel will embrace every people, including Palestinians, equally, human rights respected across the board, then I would challenge Hamas to change its charter and say we will acknowledge Israel. But until that time, I see no difference between Nelson Mandela and Hamas in refusing to accept apartheid or the Zionist Israeli state.
Between Lord Balfour and this Jewish millionaire by the name of Rothschild, they decided that it was okay to take somebody else's country and give it to the Jews. You know, this was a world where you could do things like that. People who were white and European could take the countries of people who were brown and not European and do as they will. And basically that's what the Balfour Declaration is. One white racist promising another white racist somebody else's country.
With the coverage of Palestine, it was very obvious that the Western media have a double standard. I think they don't feel the emotional connection to the Palestinians. It's very interesting to see that the only conversation that they only have is like how proportionate the response should be, as if it's about how many people we should kill, not if we should stop the killing in the first place. Unfortunately, the Western media has adopted the Israeli point of view, without questioning. And even when the Israeli media has been refuting some of the lies and the allegation that the Israeli government has propagated, like decapitated babies or the mass rape, the Western media is not reporting on that at all, which is very sad.
One thing you say about repetition, about the problem of being Palestinian, is the need endlessly to retell the story from the beginning. And you talk about an article in a fashion magazine under the headline "Terrorist Couture," which is a kind of photo article about the Palestinian dresses. This headline, which makes a number of claims. First of all, claims that they're not really Palestinian, that they're Arab dresses which the Palestinians have somehow hijacked. Right. I may use that verb.
Right. Go right ahead. We do it all the time.
Also that they're essentially rich people's dresses,
right.
That they're not dresses of the people, they're haute bourgeois dresses.
Yes, upper middle class, she said, yes. Right.
Sorry, she's an American. She doesn't know French.
She doesn't know French.
She's called Sharon Churcher, and as you say in the book, in the larger scheme of things, who is Sharon Churcher? And she's somebody, doing a hack job on a hack fashion magazine. And yet, Edward says he feels the need to go right back to the beginning and to say these are Palestinian dresses, they are not upper middle class dresses, and to explain the whole history of Palestine in order to unmake the lie of Sharon Churcher. And that problem of repetition, that you have to go back and tell the story from the beginning every time because so many lies have intervened. Does that get tiring? I mean,
it does. You find yourself having to do it every single time, and but you do it anyway. I mean, it's like it's like trying to find the magical moment where everything starts, as in Midnight's Children, midnight. So you go back, but it's very hard to do that because you have to work out everything, and get past a lot of information that's there in the daily press. Why don't Palestinians just stay where they are? Why are they such troublemakers? That immediately launches you into a tremendous sort of harangue about, really our history was this, and we were there. And I tell people, my mother was born in Nazareth, my father was born in Jerusalem, and I'm bored by the whole story. Yes. But you feel you have to do it. And the interesting thing is, that there seems to be nothing sort of in the world that sustains the story, that keeps it there. In other words, unless you're telling it, it's just going to drop and disappear. Sort of, like Scheherazade did.
So it needs to be perpetually told in order to exist.
Yeah, exactly. In order to be, whereas you feel that the other narratives are there and they're kind of permanent and they're, they have a kind of institutional existence, and you have to just try and work away at them.
The occupation is illegal and must be brought to an immediate, unconditional and total end. The right of self-determination requires that UN member states bring Israel's occupation to an immediate end. No aid, no assistance, no complicity, no contribution to forcible actions, no money, no arms, no trade, no nothing. All UN members are obliged by law to end Israel's presence on the territory of Palestine, period.
السلامة الله يسهل عليك الله يسهل عليك الله يسهل عليك السلامة جزوني مكان جنب الله يرحمه ويرحم جميع شهدائنا ربنا يصبرنا.
Israel was constructed on the ruins of another society and by the mass dispossession of another people who remain unacknowledged as just sort of obscure natives in the background, back to the desert, let them go to one of the other Arab countries. That's been the position. And we bear no... The Oslo Accords say specifically that Israel bears no responsibility for the costs of the occupation. This after 20 years, 26 years of military occupation, no responsibility. As an Israeli journalist said, he said, we took over the country in 1948 from the British. The British left us the port of Haifa, a road system, an electrical system, a large number of municipal buildings, and lots of prisons. And we could build Israel. Without that, there would be no state today. If we had taken Palestine in 1948 the way we left Gaza for the Palestinians, there would be no Israel. We destroyed the economy. We deported most of the capable people. We forced the people to live in hovels and refugee camps over a period. I mean, if anybody's been to Gaza, it's one of the most criminal places on earth because of Israeli policy of occupation. And they bear no responsibility for it. I mean, that's simply unacceptable, even for the Jewish people who have suffered so much. It's unacceptable. You cannot continue to victimize somebody else just because you yourself were a victim once. There has to be a limit.
The UN says there are 300,000 people starving in northern Gaza, but they're no longer delivering aid there for the time being, and here's why. The last UN aid truck was hit on February 5th while travelling north. It says they were fired on by the Israeli Navy. Satellite imagery taken just 2 hours after the attack shows boats that could only be Israeli naval boats. They are the only ones permitted in these waters, and their measurements fit those of IDF ships. Now, the UN also says they had agreed this route in advance with the IDF, and we've seen emails confirming this. It was meant to go along Al-Rashid Road up the coast of Gaza. It was part of a convoy of 10. And according to an internal UN incident report, it was stationary at an IDF holding point for over an hour when the firing began. Now, experts in international humanitarian law told us this may be considered a war crime, particularly when depriving these areas of food, of aid, is contributing to mass starvation at a time when many in Gaza are facing imminent famine.
I am watching videos of rescue teams removing charred bodies from the rubble. This is all too familiar. Israeli forces have attacked our convoys, detained our staff, bulldozed our vehicles, hospitals have been bombed and raided, and now, for a second time, one of our staff shelters has been hit. This pattern of attacks is either intentional or indicative of reckless incompetence. Our colleagues in Gaza are fearful that as I speak to you today, they will be punished tomorrow. Madam President, every day we are witnessing unimaginable horror.
It's illegal in this country to deny the Holocaust. It's not illegal to deny the Nakba. So we live in a world where the attitude and the denial of the colonialist is dominant. And so naturally, Israel's colonization of Palestine is just taken for granted. It's not a crime, it's just the way it needs to be. Imagine what Jews would be feeling if the whole world denies the Holocaust. Who said this never happened? Or if it did happen, it was your own damn fault. Which is pretty much what the official media, singing the Israeli chorus, is telling the Palestinians.
But things were far, far worse than we had expected. Appalling injuries, mainly in kids and women. There's a narrative, of course, being peddled that they're only targeting Hamas militants, therefore young males. I operated on far more women than I did males. We saw mainly a lot of children coming in with the most appalling injuries, many of whom you knew were going to die, and you couldn't give them pain relief. There was often no morphine. There was nowhere for them to die in dignity. So often they were just literally left lying on the floor of the corner of the emergency department to die.
They were among the 500 Arab villages completely depopulated at the barrel of a gun in 1948, in what became known as the Nakba. Those who wouldn't leave their homes were killed. That year, the United Nations issued Resolution 194, which mandated that all of the 750,000 Palestinians made refugees from the Nakba had the right to return to the land they were ethnically cleansed from. From that day forward, Israel has refused, in flagrant violation of international law. Displacement of the indigenous population was always the plan. As founder and first Prime Minister Ben-Gurion declared, "We must expel the Arabs and take their places." Just 6 months after Israel's creation, top secret military orders revealed their policy targeting the movement of civilian Arabs from Gaza. Their mission, put plainly, expulsion of the Arab villagers and denial of their return by demolishing their houses, to gather all the residents and deport them to Gaza, to burn down the villages, and most shockingly, surveying the refugees' way of movement and laying mines in the routes. And in 1954, the Prevention of Infiltration Law was created to punish any refugee trying to return, under which a shoot-to-kill policy was employed.
Look at what an average 16-year-old has endured in their lifetime. At birth, an Israeli land, air, and sea blockade has affected every aspect of his or her life, from food to health and education. At the age of 2, the child would have lived through 23 days of devastating air and ground attacks. Nearly 1,400 Palestinians were killed during Israel's Operation Cast Lead. 320 were children. Then in 2012, when the child would be 5 years old, they would have survived an 8-day assault that killed more than 80 people, most of them women and children. At age 7, the child would have endured a 50-day Israeli onslaught. At least 2,310 Palestinians were killed in 2014. 551 were children. As a young teenager, he or she would have witnessed the aftermath of Israeli attacks that lasted 11 days. 260 Palestinians were killed, 67 were children. And now, another war on Gaza, this one far worse than any other. At age 16 today, an average Palestinian child is living through what's been described as genocide. 60 days of war in which more than 16,248 people have been killed, more than 7,112 of them children.
But I think the overall feeling that I have is one, when I think about it, for any length of time, is one of astonishment at the sort of injustice of it. Here I am, a child of a people that's been sort of kicked out of its own land, forbidden to return. I mean, that is to say, most of the authors of these books, for example, are sometimes students who are employed by these agencies to spy on me and to find out what I say and that sort of thing. And if they're Jewish, just by fact of being Jewish, born in New York, of a Jewish parent, they're entitled to go to Israel, or Palestine as I call it, become Israeli citizens at any time that they wish. I was born there, my father was born there, my grandfather, great-grand, etc. And I can't return. I don't have the same right. I mean, the law of return somehow covers them. And my people, my family, were kicked out of there. And they're writing books about me, accusing me of terrorism. I mean, the enormity of the whole thing just baffles me at the same time that it strikes me very strongly.
Because when we were kicked out of Catholic Spain in 1492, when we were kicked out of Catholic Portugal, I think in 1503, it was the Muslims who took the Jews in. That's why there are Jewish communities in the Islamic world till this very day. The Islamic community, the Jewish community of Istanbul dates from then. It was specifically countries not beyond the Ottoman Empire where Jews were tolerated and they were welcomed in. And they paid a jizya. There was a poll tax they paid, but they were never persecuted. And there wasn't a Holocaust in the Islam.
As far as the Palestinians specifically, they were there, they need their land, and Israel is a satellite of this country. We sell them nuclear weapons, and you can just imagine what kind of deal the Palestinians are going to get. Yeah.
And look for Aaron's military leaders. Where are they? Where are his leaders? Where are his colleagues, his co-workers? Why are they not here to mourn this soldier, this airman, where are they? You know who is here today? Patriots. True patriots. Yeah. That's who's here today, because probably before this situation, I'd imagine that there's some tension between people from the Middle East and the military, because of course they send us to do their bidding. They send us to do the bidding. Do you know who sends us to do the bidding? The legislative branch, the executive branch. They send us to do the bidding and make their money, and they kill us, and they come home and they barely support us with mental health, with a future. They say, oh, you'll get a GI Bill and free college though. But I want you to remember this day, because I will for the rest of my life. Who showed up for this soldier? Who showed up? You guys did, because you have a heart. Humanity is in your hearts, and humanity will prevail.
My name is Alan Shabaro. I was with 3rd Special Forces Group. I was with the Commanders in Extremis Force with B-23. I was a sniper, assaulter, and a breacher. I did 3 rotations, 2008, 2009, and 2007. I know war. What's going on in Palestine right now is not a war. It is the dehumanization, it's the genocide, it's the ethnic cleansing of a specific people to take their land. This is wrong, and there's nothing more American than speaking out against what's wrong. The U.S. taxpayer is paying for this, which makes it even more frustrating. This needs to stop. This needs to stop. Whatever you can do, anything, this needs to stop.
A mother and daughter taking shelter inside a church in northern Gaza have been killed by Israeli snipers. Some witnesses say the women were shot in cold blood at the Holy Family Catholic Church. One was killed while she was carrying her elderly mother to safety.
They're using snipers to shoot women inside of churches. The fuck else do you want me to say? What else is there to say?
A massive scandal is developing at the New York Times, where it has now been revealed that the co-author of a discredited article on rape on October 7th, liked genocidal posts on social media, is a former member of an IDF intelligence unit, and had not even worked as a journalist at all prior to taking on a central role in Times coverage. The Times is now investigating the journalist, a woman by the name of Anat Schwartz, but the questions about this incident go so far beyond this one journalist and her appreciation for psychopathic social media posts. So here is the backstory. On December 28th, the New York Times published and news alerted what appeared to be an extensive investigation into one of the most fraught and contested parts of the Israeli October 7th narrative, that sexual assault was used by Hamas systematically as a weapon of war on that day. The piece was headlined, "Screams Without Words, How Hamas Weaponized Sexual Violence on October 7th, and the byline named 3 different authors, Jeffrey Gettleman, Anat Schwartz, and Adam Sella. Now, the fact that Hamas committed atrocities on October 7th is not in dispute. However, certain particularly horrifying anecdotes claimed by the Israeli government have fallen apart under scrutiny by Israeli outlet Haaretz. These debunked claims include that 40 babies were beheaded, that a baby was found in an oven, and that a pregnant woman had her baby cut out of her, among others. It is no accident, of course, that these stories were propagated. This agitprop about the barbarism of Hamas was crucial for Israel in their attempt to justify a barbaric assault on the Gaza Strip. So this piece, Screams Without Words, was published by the New York Times purporting to back up Israeli assertions about widespread rape on October 7th. It was incredibly significant. But no sooner had the piece been published that major problems emerged. The family of a woman murdered by Hamas, who was presented as a central figure in the New York Times narrative about widespread rape, denounced the story in furious and unequivocal terms. They claimed that when the Times interviewed them about their murdered loved one, Gal Abdush, under false pretenses, the family said that they had no indication Gal had been raped, no evidence to support such claims, did not believe them to be true, and that they had no idea that the Times had planned to say that Gal had been raped. Multiple family members told the Israeli press that the media invented the story and demanded that they stop spreading lies. Gal's story comprised no less than 1/3 of the lengthy Times report. And that was really just the beginning of the problems with that report. Key witnesses were caught telling inconsistent stories to different news outlets. Screams Without Words had relied on the testimony of a volunteer with an ultra-Orthodox nonprofit called Zaka that had been caught fabricating some of the most visceral debunked anecdotes about October 7th, including that one about the 40 beheaded babies. And the Times itself, well, they appeared to lose confidence in the reporting. As our colleague Ryan Grimm, along with Daniel Boguslaw, reported for The Intercept, an episode of the New York Times flagship podcast, The Daily, had been planned to detail the reporting from the sexual assault piece, which had originally been much hyped by the New York Times newsroom. But as the quote-unquote reporting in the piece fell apart, the Times was left with a major dilemma about what to do. Should they ignore the problems, stand by their shoddy reporting, and push out the Daily episode as recorded? Should they edit the Daily episode and attempt to correct the record, add caveats, and effectively admit the problems with that original report? Or should they take the coward's way out and just shelve the episode entirely? Now, a responsible outlet would either correct the original story or retract it, given the serious journalistic failings that have been brought to light. But the Times chose to keep their propaganda piece as is, shelve the Daily episode, and hope that everyone just moved on. Incredibly, the lead author of that piece, Jeffrey Gettleman, was at great pains to explain that as a journalist, he did not see his job as providing evidence for his reporting claims. Take a listen.
I don't want to even use the word evidence, because evidence is almost like a legal term that suggests you're trying to prove an allegation or prove a case in court. That's not my role. We all have our roles, and my role is to document, is to present information, is to give people a voice.
So if this investigation didn't include evidence, what the hell are we doing here? But as if all of that wasn't wild enough, we are now learning some absolutely shocking things about the background of the second reporter on that piece, the aforementioned Anat Schwartz. Shout out to Z Squirrel for doing this digging online. First of all, on October 7th, Anat liked to post calling for Gaza to be turned into a slaughterhouse. This post was so overtly genocidal in its rhetoric that it was actually cited in South Africa's filing at The Hague. The post read in part, one principle that needs to be abandoned today, proportionality. Need a disproportionate response. May Israel see what she is hiding in the basement. If all the captives are not returned immediately, turn the strip into a slaughterhouse. If a hair falls from their head, execute security prisoners, violate any norm on the way to victory. The post goes on to explain, quote, those in front of us are human animals. Anat also apparently liked a post about that 40 beheaded babies lie, and another one calling for an effective propaganda operation to equate Hamas with ISIS. Love for our journalists to be out here explicitly advocating for propaganda campaigns. This is completely insane. If a journalist had liked similarly genocidal post calling for Israel to be turned into a slaughterhouse, it would be a national scandal. The entire New York Times leadership would be dragged in front of congressional hearings and summarily fired. In fact, New York Times forced out a prominent staff writer who was not involved in Israel-Palestine coverage simply for signing a letter opposing Israel's genocide in Gaza. The International Court of Justice, of course, has now agreed that it is in fact plausible Israel is committing genocide. Now, after Anat's posts were exposed, she locked down her Twitter account, deleted most of her history before returning. But while she can delete her social media history, she can't really so easily delete her professional past, which, if anything, is actually even wilder. So apparently, prior to landing this plum gig at the New York Times, Anat Schwartz had never worked as a journalist, never published a single piece anywhere ever, before being scooped up by the Times in November, just after the October 7th attack. She had been working as a small-time filmmaker. Perhaps the Times was looking for someone with a flair for the cinematic. But really think about this. Actual journalists spend their entire careers dreaming of a New York Times byline. The Times, after all, is the holy grail of elite journalism. And this lady, with literally zero experience, somehow gets brought in on a highly sensitive investigation on one of the most fraught topics imaginable. How the hell did this happen? But Anat is not only a former filmmaker, she is also a former IDF soldier who served, I kid you not, in an Air Force intelligence unit. So the lady with the genocidal social media posts, with no prior journalism experience and a background in Israeli military intelligence, was contracted to report on a piece which perfectly served Israeli government propaganda efforts at the time. What is happening here? Ryan, of course, has been doing great reporting as usual. He's got it from several sources. The Times is parting ways with Anat. It's already been reported she is under investigation. But at this point, those actions seem like convenient scapegoating to cover up much graver questions. Who brought this lady in? How did they find her? Who greenlit this piece? Why have they not addressed the journalistic collapse of their supposedly blockbuster investigation? And what other Israeli propaganda and lies are they currently laundering? It's not only the New York Times, by the way. Wall Street Journal recently published a piece based on zero evidence that ran cover for Israeli claims about UNRWA, which helped justify the U.S. pulling aid at a time when Palestinians in Gaza are starving to death. That piece, too, was co-authored by a so-called journalist named Carrie Keller-Lynn with undeniable biases. She, too, served in the IDF and in an interview bragged about how her very close friend literally created social media for the IDF. Those are her words, not mine. Once these photos that you can see on your screen started circulating, Carrie Keller-Lynn also locked her accounts, scrubbed her history to prevent anyone from gathering further insights into her pro-Israel bias. Now, this incident casts in a whole new light the studies would show systematic bias across major news outlets when it comes to coverage of Israelis and coverage of Palestinians. Israelis are slaughtered, Palestinians just mysteriously die. Great pains are often taken to make sure that Israel is never directly ascribed blame. And as the Palestinian death toll has climbed, the coverage of their deaths has actually plummeted. It is a testament to the outrageous nature of the suffering that in spite of this onslaught of lies and propaganda, the American people still overwhelmingly support a ceasefire. Even Anat, with her skills as a filmmaker, with an Israeli intelligence background, can't craft propaganda strong enough to overcome the visceral horror of what has been.
There are bombs. This is like your Coke dealer coming in with an 8-ball and going, don't stay up all night. Don't. Sleep is very important. You got to sleep. You don't want to. And breakfast is an important part of the day. So,
Holy Week dawns in Jerusalem. The tension of the old city has melted away. Abed Judah makes his way through the narrow alleys to his job. He carries with him the obligation of centuries.
Good morning, Andre.
His ancestors have held this job. Now it is his turn. He's entrusted with the key to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is the site where the Bible says Jesus Christ was crucified. It is one of the holiest sites in Christianity. And its key belongs to a Muslim family, a neutral guardian for a site sacred to so many Christian denominations. Judah shows us the family cupboard. Inside is a Quran and a Bible. He considers the church a second home. The contracts for the guardian of the key date back hundreds of years. He shows us the oldest contract in his home. It was written in 1517. This is the family heritage, he says. It's all we own as a family, and this is not only an honor for our family, this is an honor for all Muslims in the world. He has pictures of his great-grandfather, who cared for the key at the turn of the last century. In this family, that's recent history.
This is the key to one of the holiest places in Christianity. Yes. And every morning, this key opens the door.
This key opens the door.
For 500 years.
For more than 850 years.
He tells me what we pass to the next generation is not
Who are the animals?
Yeah.
Who are the animals, Cenk? Who are the animals?
Yeah.
Because I'm getting real sick of people on social media referring to Palestinian civilians as animals. Because every story that we've covered, everything that we've investigated and looked into, does not really show Palestinians behaving as animals. It shows the IDF behaving as animals. People who feel real good about themselves, shooting their weapons at desperate people as they swarm a humanitarian aid truck.
I saw in Auschwitz that if a dominant group wants to dehumanize others, so as the Nazis wanted to dehumanize me, these dominant group must first be dehumanized in a way themselves by diminishing their empathy due to propaganda and indoctrination in order to be able to be as cruel as some were. Okay, but the same holds nowadays for Israel. I am appalled about how hateful, how dehumanized, that they do not see any human aspect in any Palestinian anymore. It's terrible. The Zionists have not any right whatsoever to use the Holocaust for any purpose. They have given up everything which has to do with humanity, with empathy, for one thing, the state, the blood and soil, just like the Nazis. I was educated in the, I learned at school about blood and soil, and that's exactly their idea too. And humans do not play a role. Judaism, as I learned it, is highly ethical. And so you cannot connect Zionism with highly ethical. You can only connect the words aggressive, oppressive, stealing, robbing with Zionism, but not highly ethical. Zionism and Judaism are contrary to each other because Judaism is universal and humane, and Zionism is exactly the opposite. It is very narrow, very nationalistic, racist, colonialistic, and all this. There is no national Judaism. There is Zionism and there is Judaism, and they are completely different.
I refuse to take part in this revenge war. I'm refusing because I want to make a statement about how we need to conduct ourselves in this land. I feel like there's too much violence here. There's too much revenge and talk about this side or that side. And we need to talk about how we need to go forward in a future of coexistence where both Israelis and Palestinians can live together and live with security and peace. I got sentenced for 30 days for my first sentencing, and I got another draft order for Monday morning, which means I have to get drafted on Monday morning, where I will go and refuse service once again and probably get sentenced again. And this will happen over and over until someone gives up, until the army gives me an exemption. I refuse to take part.
We have technology that we can see exactly who's in these locations and buildings. So they're targeting and bombing homes, knowing who and how many children were actually inside. My name is Josephine Gilbo. I'm a 17-year Army veteran. I recently got out of the military last year. Having that background as an intelligence officer and understanding what defense actually is, I can see clearly that this is not self-defense. The civilian casualties is catastrophic. They're targeting homes filled with children. The elite that sit in Capitol Hill sit there and lie over and over and over. I just want to highlight one of the biggest awakenings that I think I've had the last few weeks coming here and lobbying with the senators and the congressmen is just how corrupt our government is. And that anyone that's in the military is simply just one chess piece that they use at their leisure for their own internal gain to protect their own internal assets and money.
My late father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. My late mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. Every single member of my family on both sides was exterminated. Both of my parents were in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And it's precisely and exactly because of the lessons my parents taught me and my two siblings that I will not be silent when Israel commits its crimes against the Palestinians. And I consider nothing more despicable than to use their suffering and their martyrdom to try to justify the torture, the brutalization, the demolition of homes that Israel daily commits against the Palestinians. So I refuse any longer to be intimidated or browbeaten by the tears. If you had any heart in you, you would be crying for the Palestinians, not for what's being done.
My name is Renee Lichtman. I'm a Holocaust survivor. I think we're committing war crimes in Gaza, and we should fight back in any way that we can. There are parallels to what the Nazis did. The Nazi plan was, if you can starve them, that's fine, or diseases. And the Israelis are very conscious of that, and they're proud. They brag about all that stuff.
Tell us about your own history.
I was born 37.
Mm-hmm.
Poland was invaded in 39. My father joined the French army, and he was killed. My family members were taken to different death camps.
You compared the Israeli siege on Gaza to the Warsaw Ghetto. Can you elaborate on that?
The Palestinian people have been oppressed and humiliated since 1948. And they've been in these concentration camps with guards all around them their whole lives. The Warsaw Ghetto fighters were these young people. They were all socialists. They were all on the left. They were very conscious. They were going to die in the Warsaw Ghetto, and they were going to take some with them. And I'm sure that was the philosophy of a lot of the Hamas people.
I'd like you to address the slander that opposition to Israel is anti-Semitism.
What there is anti-Israel sentiment, but it's called consciously to confuse the issues. It's called anti-Semitism. The real anti-Semitism comes from the right wing.
בעזרת השם זה יחזור. הם ירצו הגויים להיות עבדים שלנו. יש מסביבנו עמים כאלה, בעיות גנטיות. תשאל ערבי פשוט, איפה אתה רוצה להיות? הוא רוצה להיות תחת הכיבוש. למה? כי הם יש להם בעיה גנטית, הם לא יודעים לנהל מדינה, הם לא יודעים לעשות כלום. כן, אנחנו גזענים, אנחנו מאמינים בגזענות.
השואה באמת זה לא שהרגו את היהודים, זאת לא השואה. כל התירוצים האלה כמו זה אידיאולוגי או זה שיטתי או כל זה לא שטויות. זה כיוון שזה נבע מתוך אידיאולוגיה, במידה מסוימת זה יותר מוסרי מאשר סתם שאנשים רוצחים. הומניזם, כל התרבות החילונית שאנחנו מאמינים באדם, זה השואה. השואה באמת זה להיות פלורליסטי.
בעזרת השם זה יחזור. הם ירצו הגויים להיות עבדים שלנו. יש מסביבנו עמים כאלה, בעיות גנטיות. תשאל ערבי פשוט, איפה אתה רוצה להיות? הוא רוצה להיות תחת הכיבוש. למה? כי הם יש להם בעיה גנטית, הם לא יודעים לנהל מדינה, הם לא יודעים לעשות כלום. כן, אנחנו גזענים, אנחנו מאמינים בגזענות.
השואה באמת זה לא שהרגו את היהודים, זאת לא השואה. כל התירוצים האלה כמו זה אידיאולוגי או זה שיטתי או כל זה לא שטויות. זה כיוון שזה נבע מתוך אידיאולוגיה, במידה מסוימת זה יותר מוסרי מאשר סתם שאנשים רוצחים. הומניזם, כל התרבות החילונית שאנחנו מאמינים באדם, זה השואה. השואה באמת זה להיות פלורליסטי.
Just about everything Israel does should be called U.S. Israel because they work in tandem, and Israel cannot go beyond what the U.S. will support and permit it to do. So there's the U.S. and Israel since the early 90s have been committed to separating Gaza from the West Bank in strict violation of the Oslo agreements, which declare them to be a territorial unity. It's been done in many ways, closures and so on and so forth. By now they're pretty separate. So if a person in Gaza, say a young person in Gaza wants to study in West Bank University, can't do it. If somebody in Gaza needs medical attention that they can get in a Jerusalem hospital, can't go. If somebody wants to see their family, not very many miles away. They can't do it. So by now they're pretty well split. That's one element. The second, with regard to the West Bank, is to take over Israel. The U.S. and Israel want to take over essentially what's valuable in the West Bank and to let the rest kind of rot. And we know exactly what it is because you can see it happening. And in fact, the plans have been developing step by step over the past 20 years.
If you don't have a moral compass or some form of moral clarity at this point to say, this needs to stop now, and you accept any justification for such barbaric acts happening, you lose all credibility. You can no longer speak of international law. Put it aside, no longer speak of it any time in your lifetime. This is it. In every generation, we have a moment in time that is decisive. Level of destruction we've seen, we have not seen since 1948. You wake up in the morning, the room you decided to sleep in is a life or death decision. You don't know the right decision. You decide to leave your home or stay in your home. It's a life or death decision. You are informed that there is humanitarian aid for you in this distribution center. You got a bag of flour. You decide to go pick it up or stay hungry. If you decide to go pick it up, that's a life or death decision. You might not make it back. Your child is wounded. Trying to get him to a hospital is a life or death decision. Every single day, 2.3 million people wake up in the morning not knowing if they will make it to the night, sleep at night not knowing if they will make it to the next day.
יוצא שהדין הבסיסי שיש לנו כשאנחנו נלחמים מלחמת מצווה, במקרה הזה בעזה, על פי עיקר הדין, לא תחי כל נשמה. הסברה בזה מאוד ברורה, לא תהרוג אותם, הם יהרגו אותך. המחבלים של היום הם הילדים של המבצע הקודם שהשארת אותם בחיים. והנשים הם בעצם אלה שיוצרות את המחבלים. מה שאומר שההגדרה הזו בשביל לא תחייב כל נשמה היא מאוד ברורה בסברה. זה או אתה או הם. בעצם הלא תחייב כל נשמה הוא מבוסס על פי נימוקי הפסוקים על הבא לעובדך שכם דורגו. והבא לעובדך כאן בממד הרחב, לא רק האיש בין ה-18, 16, 20, 30 שמרים עליך הנשק, אלא גם הדור העתיד, וגם מי שמייצר את דור העתיד. כי באמת אין הבדל. מה? אנשים מבוגרים. אין בלתי מעורבים. ודרך אגב, גם אדם זקן, מי שאתה מגדיר כזקן, מסוגל להרים רובה ולראות. אז לכן זה הפשט של התורה הוא מאוד מאוד מובן גם מסברה. ואז על פי כל הערכות של גורמי הביטחון, 95-98% הם רוצים בהשמדתנו. זה רוב שהוא לא משתק. אותו דבר. אותו דבר. אם אתה משאיר אותו, כאילו אתה לא יכול להתחכם עם התורה. כשהתורה אומרת, לא תחייב כל נשמה, לא תחייב כל נשמה. היום הוא תינוק, היום הוא ילד, מחר, לוחם. הלוחמים, נקרא לזה, המחבלים של היום בני ה-18, היו ילדים בני 8, בני 10 שנים במבצע הקודם. אז אין כאן, כאילו, אתה לא יכול להסתפק כאן.
We have a question from somebody on Zoom who is asking, of course war is horrible, so why did the Palestinians initiate this war with their vicious attack on Israelis on October 7th?
Well, they didn't. They didn't. This war has been going on for 75 years. Israel initiated it in 1948 by ethnically cleansing 750,000 people. We must expel Arabs. We must expel Arabs and take their places.
And are we all Democrats here? Are we Democrats? I'm leaving. Yes, I am leaving, and I will never be back. This is not a Democrat.
Okay.
Don't kill any more babies tonight, okay? Yeah, I don't believe.
Yeah, I know.
Is the U.S.
We must expel Arabs and take their places, and if we have to use force, not to dispossess the Arabs of the Negev and Transjordan, but to guarantee our own right to settle in those places, then we have force at our disposal. David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, said that in 1937, and that's what they proceeded to do. The people in Gaza, this is what you need to understand. The people in Gaza, over 80% of them are refugees. Many of them are from a place called Majdal Asqalan in what is now southern Israel, in a city called Ashkelon. And they were dragged from their homes and driven from their homes, placed in prison camps, barbed wire prison camps, and then dumped in trucks in 1950 into the Gaza Strip, where they would be permanently warehoused. And then Israel proceeded to move Arab, Jewish refugees and Russians into Ashkelon to prevent them from ever coming back, and pass laws to prevent Arabs, Palestinians, from being able to return to their homes. 750,000 were ethnically cleansed. For 18 years, the remaining Palestinians, 100,000, were internally displaced inside Israel. The remaining were put under military rule. They were under military occupation until 1966. Then in 1967, Israel violently, in a war it initiated, occupies Gaza, occupies the West Bank, occupies the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights in East Jerusalem, and then invades Lebanon in 1982, attacking Palestinian refugees there, puts Gaza under siege in 2005. No one can get in or out without Israeli military permission. We must kill and kill all day, every day. That's according to Arnon Sofer, an Israeli government consultant who helped devise the siege of Gaza. For years, Israel would not allow certain chocolates and A2 paper into Gaza. And then they began these brutal military assaults, which they call mowing the lawn. Slaughtering a few people will leave Hamas intact, but teach them a lesson. And I talked to you about those assaults that took place on Gaza. So this didn't come out of a vacuum. You're not going to be able to hold people under siege, to cut them off from the world, and then expect them to just play along. That doesn't mean that I celebrate what happened on October 7th. It should have never had to happen. The reason it happened is because of the Israel lobby here, the genocide Democrats and the genocide Republicans who deny the Palestinians any right to have rights. And it's the right to have rights that defines you as a citizen. They're citizens of nothing. And now we see what Israel really thinks of them, really thinks of their children. Gaza has become a graveyard for children, according to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. So this didn't start on October 7th, and it's not going to end when there's a ceasefire.
Max?
I have family in Israel, and I have family, I am Jewish, and I have been through a lot of racism and brainwashing, and now I'm seeing the truth. I'm so sorry to Palestinian people, but this is an apartheid state.
My name is Rachel Corey. I'm from the United States. I'm from Olympia, Washington.
Rachel Corey became internationally famous when she was crushed to death by a bulldozer in Gaza last year.
We are international human rights observers from the United Kingdom, from England, from Scotland, from Italy, and from the United States of America.
I've been here for about a month and a half now, and this is definitely the most difficult situation that I've ever seen. In the time that I've been here, children have been shot and killed. On the 30th of January, the Israeli military bulldozed the two largest water wells, destroying over half of Rafah's water supply. Every few days, if not every day, houses are demolished here.
We are unarmed international human rights observers.
When the bulldozer crushed her, Rachel became the first American martyr to die in Palestine at the age of 23. While her death inspired others to follow in her footsteps, her parents were left trying to make sense of her sacrifice.
I would give anything if what happened to Rachel had not happened. I miss her profoundly, but I feel very positive about the fact that she was doing something that she felt so good about.
I knew Rachel was going there to be nonviolent. There was no use asking her to leave or not to go. And you can't wish your child to be less than they can be.
What makes an idealistic student travel across the world to die for someone else's cause? Why did Rachel die? And what did her death achieve? In January 2003, Rachel joined a small group of foreign activists working for the International Solidarity Movement. The ISM performs direct actions in Gaza against the Israeli occupation.
Yours, it's theirs. It's not your word, it's not your problem, it's my problem. It is our problem. It's our problem. It affects the entire world. It's our problem.
Can you name any country, yours for example, or yours, that would be prepared to give 55%, 25%, 10% of your country to the Palestinians? Of course not. And so the issue was not the existence of Jews in Palestine. They had been there for centuries. And of course they had ties to Palestine and particularly to Jerusalem and other places going back centuries, if not millennia. But the idea of establishing an exclusively Jewish state at the expense of those who are already living there, I think it was right to reject that. And I don't think we can look back now, 75 years later, and say, well, you should have accepted losing 55% of your homeland because you ended up losing 78% of it, and the remaining 22% was occupied in 1967. That's not how things work.
Yeah.
And I can imagine an American rejecting giving 10% of the United States to the Palestinians, and if that rejection leads to war and you lose half your country, I doubt that 50 years from now you're going to say, well, maybe I should have accepted that.
If Israel wants to carry out war crimes, they shouldn't do it with our money. You can't, on one hand, demand that American taxpayers who are desperate for a better life here in America, they need to hand over billions of dollars to the Israeli government and the IDF, and we need to shut the F up about any of our critique. AIPAC is evil. AIPAC is evil, evil. My fellow Americans, are you okay with that? Are you okay with a lobbying group representing the best interests of a foreign government telling you you need to bust your every day, work a job that you likely hate, and have a portion of your earnings taken from you by our federal government and funneled to the Israeli government so they can commit atrocities in the Gaza Strip? Are you okay with that?
Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, said in the 1930s that politically speaking, we are the aggressors and the Arabs are just defending their homeland. That's what Ben-Gurion said. Now, publicly, they spoke a different language. But Ben-Gurion said this very clearly to his fellow Zionists. His political rival, Jabotinsky, who founded the party that later became today's Likud party, which is Netanyahu's party, he said that the Jewish colonial project, he called it that, the Jewish colonial project cannot be achieved without force, because no country, no people give up the land without fighting for it. So What I want people to know, in a nutshell, is there's antecedents, there's a history behind this, and the history is that of one people coming into a land and having the resources, having the imperial support to achieve their goals at the expense of displacing and oppressing and occupying and suppressing and very frequently mass killing than other people.
I've never seen Hamas militants. When I was there in Al-Aqsa Hospital for 2 weeks, I saw no evidence of that. My multiple trips to Shifa Hospital over the years, I have never seen any evidence of Hamas militant activity. And also, it's worth saying, my access to every single part of those hospitals has been unrestricted throughout all the years I've been going there. More importantly, many healthcare workers, such as me, who've been in Gaza since October the 7th, have been asked this. And without exception, every single one has responded to say they have never witnessed any Hamas militant in the hospitals they have worked in. Surgeons I know have been executed in the last 48 hours there. Bodies have been discovered in the last 12 to 24 hours who have been handcuffed, with their arms behind their back, and so there is no doubt at all that multiple healthcare workers have been executed there in the last few days. Over 450 healthcare workers have been killed. Friends of mine that I have worked with over the years, many have been abducted as well, and nothing has been heard of them since. So there is no doubt in my mind, and I can bear witness from this from my time at Al-Aqsa Hospital and from talking to people, that there's been direct targeting of the healthcare system in Gaza, direct targeting of hospitals, and multiple killings of healthcare workers.
Theodor Herzl, who's known as the founder of modern Zionism, he wrote about what this Jewish state would be like. And he was very clear, this is not about religion. This is not about realizing the religious claim to the land. That is not the basis of this state. This state is going to be a secular state. And in fact, in his diaries, not so much in his famous book, The Jewish State, but in his diaries, he included the letters that he had written to Cecil Rhodes, the great British colonialist, urging Rhodes to support his project. He wanted Rhodes to be his backer and to persuade the British Crown to support, as they ultimately did, the creation of a Jewish state in what was then British-controlled Palestine. So he writes to Rhodes and he says, why am I asking you? You're interested in Africa, and I'm interested in this little piece of Arabia. You're concerned about Englishmen. I'm concerned about Jews. So why am I coming to you? Why am I asking you for help? And then he says, he comes to the crux of it, because our projects are both something colonial.
It makes me angry as a Christian. Makes me furious as a Christian for the lack of mercy and compassion. This is definitely not Jesus' way. I can't understand which Bible are they reading. And then when I search about this congressman, only to discover that he went to prestigious and influential evangelical seminaries. He was a pastor. I couldn't believe it. I mean, this is a stain on the credibility of the Christian witness. And he brings the example of two cities that were completely destroyed with hundreds of thousands killed as a positive example. I couldn't believe it. The real scary part of all of this is that Israel could actually do it and get away with it because of people like him providing the political and theological cover to execute such a genocide.
That before 1948, there was no Gaza Strip. The strip itself is an Israeli invention. Gaza was a cosmopolitical town on the Via Maris, the road from Alexandria up to Alexandretta in Turkey. And because it was the main road on the sea, many people from different countries and cultures passed through Gaza and left an impact that turned it into one of the most cosmopolitical towns before 1948. It also had a very good system of a coexistence between Muslims, Christians, and Jews. Just recently, a friend of ours found an interesting declaration in 1905 by the three heads of the religions in the city of Gaza, expressing their delight in 1905 and how well are the three communities deal with issues of friction, disagreement, and conflict. Israel created the Gaza Strip because, unlike other places into which it could push the many Palestinians it expelled during the Nakba, during the 1948 catastrophe, unlike other countries such as Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, that were willing to receive the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians that Israel expelled, Egypt closed its border. Egypt refused to accept even one Palestinian. And because of that, the leader of Israel, the great architect of the ethnic cleansing of 1948, David Ben-Gurion, who ashamedly has a boulevard named after him in Paris, is a war criminal. And he decided that Israel is willing to give 2% of historical Palestine in order to turn it into the biggest refugee camp in the world. And that's how the Gaza Strip was created, by the Israelis as a kind of rectangle, a structure, a geometric kind of structure, into which Israel pushed the Palestinians from the central of Palestine and from the south that Egypt was unwilling to accept. The last group of Palestinians who were pushed into the Gaza Strip were those living in 11 villages on whose ruins, on the ruins of these villages, Israel built the settlements that were attacked on the 7th of October by the Hamas. So the Hamas attacked settlements built on the ruins of the last villages of Palestine that were destroyed by the Israeli army and expelled to Gaza. In the Israeli archive, we have a very known document called Order Number 40. Order Number 40 is from the 25th of November 1948, and it was sent by the Israeli Central Command to the commander in the area of Gaza. And it has the name of the 11 villages, and the order says, and I quote literally what the order says, occupy the village, expel all the people to Gaza, burn the houses, and demolish the stone houses. Because some of the houses of the Palestinian villages in 1948 were built of mortar and straw, and therefore it was possible to burn them. But the stone houses had to be blown up by the Israeli army. So one historical context we have here is a generation of grandfathers and grandmothers, fathers and mothers, grandchildren that live either directly or indirectly the Nakba of 1948 in a very vivid way on a daily basis, not only because they are thinking about Jaffa or they are thinking about Beersheba or any other place from which they were expelled, but also by watching the Israeli settlements on the other side of the fence from which most of their parents and grandparents came from.
I wake up every day with Gaza on my mind.
Yeah.
I go to sleep with it, I wake up with it.
Yeah.
And to think of the horror that's now being inflicted on Palestinians in the name of my own people, it's just devastating for me. The trauma imprint that's in me has certainly been awakened now. Oh. And you know, when I think of my own infancy in wartime, and when I think of what those infants have to go through right now, I'm not here to say that my suffering is worse than that of other people. I don't compare people's suffering, and I'm just aware of how much pain and suffering there's in the world.
There is one way of looking at your own traumas and saying, I'm the worst. I've struggled, I've suffered. Or the other way where you now can so empathetically, so compassionately support anyone who goes through this, even if propaganda of the modern world tells you the other way. This definitely is not a political show, but this is not a political topic.
It's not, is it? It's a human topic.
This is a humanitarian topic. A question of, do we submit to the powers of the modern world, or do we simply say, my heart aches for killing children? It's as simple as that.
ידענו שאנחנו על ידי המלחמה אנחנו נקים את
כבשנו את אנטורה, תפסנו הרבה ערבים, אספנו אותם. גומו, קומו, קמו. הרג את כולם.
הנידון טנטורה.
אחרי שכבשו, הצילו לשים ערימות אנשים ולרופא.
העמדנו את הערבים וירינו בהם סתם.
וואלה, בזה לחסר את הטנטורה בסוף. הרגנו בהם, בלי נקיפת מצפון.
אחד הוא היה קורא לאמא, והיא באה ונפלה עליו וצערת, הוא נתן לה, וחיילת וגם נתן לה.
הכפר נמחק.
שאכן אמרו שהיה טבח. And there was not any reason to do it.
או אני או הם. המדינה נתנו את השווי.
כמה אתה חושב אנשים הרגת ככה?
ספרתי. לא יכול לדעת בחיי. היה לי מקלע עם 250 כדורים. תראה, יריתי, נלחמתי כולם, לא יכול לספור.
היו חבר'ה שלקחו את הלוויורים ורדפו אחרי חבר'ה ושרפו אותם. זה היה משהו זוועתי, וזה אסור לספר, אני לא אדבר על זה, כי זה יכול להיות סקנדל שלם בעניין הזה.
זה דבר שאתה לא שוכח.
היו המון הרוגים ערבים, והם היו זרוקים כמו זבל.
לומר במפורש, ב-48 נעשו עוולות איומות לפלסטינים.
ידענו שאנחנו על ידי המלחמה אנחנו נקים את
כבשנו את אנטורה, תפסנו הרבה ערבים, אספנו אותם. גומו, קומו, קמו.
The Jews around the world who are true to the Judaism are totally in opposition to the existence of the Zionist state of Israel. Our religion is contradictory, diametrically opposite from Zionism and the existence of the state of Israel. Our religion of Judaism is 3,000 years to be subservient to God, to emulate God, just as God is compassionate, we should be compassionate. Mahu rachum, afatate rachum, to not to kill and not to steal. And Zionism is a movement of 100, maybe 50 years. It's a transformation to nationalism. It is people who detested the Jewish religion. They decided to make their movement and establish their sovereignty, a national home, totally void of godliness, nothing with God. But they wanted to make this in a practical place, in a land that they should be successful. They wanted to go to Uganda, to Patagonia, very lush land. But they realized to have the massive support to make a sovereignty, a country, they need the world to support them. So they decided to go to Palestine. And in order to get the massive support from the world, they masquerade with the name Israel, which is Jacob in the Torah, Yisrael, the Star of David. And they tell the people, oh, God gave us the land, and we are simply taking back what is ours. This is false, patently false. It's a lie, it's repugnant, it's criminal, and it's a Nakba.
We had several other people in the country, even among the Jews, the Zionists particularly, who were against anything that is to be done if they couldn't have the whole of Palestine and everything handed to them on a silver plate so they wouldn't have to do anything. It couldn't be done. We had to take it in small doses. You can't move 5 or 6 million people out of a country and fill it up with 5 or 6 million more and expect both sets of them to be pleased.
49.
But don't think that decision to recognize Israel is an easy one. I had to make a compromise with the Arabs and divide Palestine. The Jews wanted to chase all the Arabs into the Tigris and Euphrates River, and the Arabs wanted to chase all the Jews into the Red Sea. And what I was trying to do was to find a homeland for the Jews and still be just with the Arabs.
Hello, my name is Greg Stoker, and I'm a former United States Army Ranger. I have a background in special operations and military intelligence, and I conducted 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan during the global war on terror. I now do geopolitical analysis and commentary, and I've risen to a modest prominence in that arena by the simple virtue of being accurate. I also do a bit of human rights activism, but don't worry, I won't bore you with that. I'm not interested in wasting my time or your time by trying to get you to care about the 15,000 children that Israel has quite obviously and intentionally targeted with kinetic strikes. There are actually more children slaughtered with our tax dollars than that, based off crude death rates from comparable conflicts.
Sir, if I could just pause his time. Folks, we need everybody to have order in the chambers. So this is only our first speaker and we're already doing this. Let us be quiet. Hang on one second. Folks, if you're talking and you're not standing at the podium, it's not what you ought to be doing. My goodness. Folks, every week it feels like we have to come up with a new rule, so be cool. Folks, I'm asking you to quit talking. Sir, I apologize that I had to interrupt you, but we need to get control of this. Your time, it didn't cost you any time, so please continue.
There are actually more children slaughtered with our tax dollars than that, based off crude death rates from comparable conflicts. But if that doesn't bother you yet, probably never will. So I'm just here to state that you're backing a losing horse that is now the greatest strategic liability to the United States' global interests. The IDF has been operationally defeated in both Gaza and the Northern Front in southern Lebanon. I don't have enough time to get into that obvious military reality. Just be satisfied that former Deputy Director of the Mossad, Ram Ben Barak, said on May 18th, and I quote, "The war in Gaza is aimless. We are clearly losing it. We are forced to return to fighting in the same areas, losing more soldiers, losing on the international stage, damaging relations with the United States, and causing the economy to collapse. Show me one thing we have succeeded in," unquote. They've succeeded in nothing beyond showing the world their cruelty and thereby making the Palestinian liberation cause the most pressing issue on the international stage. Israel will continue to be isolated and will become a pariah state. The question is, when will you do what you can to pressure the Biden administration to stop this madness for our own selfish interests? Because of this catastrophe and absolute failure in leadership from politicians on both sides of the aisle, the world is turning against us. Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, our traditional ally in the region, is for the first time in 20 years traveling to Iran to begin repairing relations with that regime. Non-Western countries are now looking to China with its massive Belt and Road Initiative, and Russia, recently vindicated by its inevitable victory in Ukraine, for alliances and leadership. While our hypocrisy about Western values, human rights, and the rule of law is plain for all to see, there will be irreparable consequences for American interests because of this. The International Criminal Court, which was both founded and funded by the U.S. and Britain and is meant to project Western hegemony across the globe, has now turned on an ally it was designed to protect in order to maintain its own judicial legitimacy. And we are now trying to discredit the ICC when the ICC was vital for declaring Putin a war criminal and thereby giving casus belli for us expanding the war in Ukraine. Our global institutions are crumbling, and because of it, we're going to lose out to China. We're going to lose out to Russia and BRICS. And for what? If you care about that, not the children, not the civilians, you should probably do something about it. Israel has already been strategically defeated. Why are we going down with it? I'll be back after summer recess to say, I told you so. Stop the killing, end the madness, ceasefire now. It's the only way forward for us. Thank you.